Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening. Welcome to Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. With me tonight is Mary Braxton of Prince William County and also Candy Hilliard of Stafford. And our subject tonight is regulations in child care homes in Virginia. And these two women have a great deal of experience, and I want them to share what most of us do not know or understand about how child care homes in Virginia are actually regulated. So Mary Braxton is the president of the Eastern Prince William Area Family Child Care Association, as well as the Virginia Alliance of Family Child Care Associations. You're on a lot of things. And the VSQI star rating, which I want you to explain to us later, because I think that becomes very integral and important in talking about how we provide oversight for daycare homes. Candy Hilliard is the assistant director of the Child Care Network. She's the outreach specialist and for Child Care Aware of Northern Virginia. Correct. And I really want you, in a former Board of Supervisors member from Stafford. Correct. And so I want you to kind of explain to us a little bit about Child Care Aware, because one of the things that you made me aware of was an op-ed piece by Sharon Veach, who happens to be the executive director of Child Care Aware Virginia, right, that was published in October of this year, October 28th, following the tragic death of a child in Midlothian. And in the call-out box, one of the things that she points out to us that dog groomers and nail technicians are more strictly regulated than the child care industry, right, which is true, not necessarily in Fairfax, Arlington, and Alexandria, because we have by county very strict regulations.
Correct.
However, there are 95 counties in Virginia and 40 independent cities. So altogether, technically 135 jurisdictions.
Correct.
Right. So my interest in this subject actually came up. I read a book called Overwhelmed by Bridget Schulte. A lot of people are reading this book. She's a reporter for the Washington Post, and chapter 6, The Tale of Two Pats, is about how Pat Buchanan killed a comprehensive child care bill in 1972. And in 40 years, we have not had another bill, another discussion, nothing around child care. And so Bridget lives in Alexandria, Virginia, and so the Washington Post actually did a piece over Labor Day weekend about kind of the appalling and shocking statistics we have in Virginia.
Right. Correct.
So Mary, would you like to share with us some of those kind of shocking statistics in Virginia?
Basically, in the state of Virginia, we've had 43 deaths in unregulated child care. And the majority of Virginia, and when I say the majority, it's excluding Fairfax, Arlington, and Alexandria, right, you can watch up to 5 children and have no background check, no first aid, no CPR, no training, no basic safety precautions or anything in place whatsoever. And in the majority of the state, that this is a serious issue that it definitely has to be addressed.
The really scary part about it is quite often parents bring their children to a child care thinking that there's regulation in place. The doors are open, they're taking children, they can do child care. Obviously somebody is looking in and seeing what's going on. And unfortunately that's not the case. By having the ability to have up to 5 children without any kind of background checks, without any kind of safety precautions in place, you have folks who are probably well-intentioned, but without any kind of real training around what sorts of drills they should be doing, that you really need to have a fire drill every month. And folks that have that knowledge and that information are more likely, I heard a saying, that like when you look at the military, when the bullets are flying, you fall back on your on the training and on your drills. Right. And so when you have folks that are trying to figure out how to get children out of a home when a fire has occurred, which the child in Midlothian died in a fire because the provider did not have any sort of plan in place for how she was going to get the kids out, and the child was left upstairs in a bedroom. where he literally burned up in the fire. When you have that training, you've gone through the process of how do I get these kids out of the house? How do I make sure that I'm able to get all of these babies, and how do I make sure that I can account for each of the children that are in my care? And this is something that, I've been in this business for about 25 years, and when I first started out, I went and talked to Bill Howell and said, he's the Speaker of the House now, and said, this is such an important issue. And the really sad part, frightening part, and as you're referring to in the book, nothing has been done since that time really to make sure that this threshold for how many children can be cared for without any kind of regulation is changed.
So, and how do we compare, because it seems to me, I saw some notation that our threshold at 6 children that trigger regulation by the state, the sixth child triggers it, right. But we're one of only 8 states, correct?
We rank at about 52 with regards to quality of care that's available in the state. Childcare Aware of America keeps statistics and track every one of the states, and so out of 52, which includes all of the states plus the District of Columbia and the military, Virginia is one of 8 that has such a high threshold that we rank, at the very bottom of the list.
Now, if I'm correct, in Fairfax County, Arlington, and Alexandria, it's 1 unrelated child, correct? And isn't that sort of the standard that we're looking for?
That's what we'd like.
That's what we'd like, yes.
Now, and of course, we fully expect that there will be pushback.
Right.
And there's a number of reasons we expect that there will be pushback.
Right.
There's a lot of times that sense of, sort of that nanny government, overstepping its bounds, trying to take care of things that the parents are responsible for. The reality is, again, parents come in thinking that there is this regulation. When we go to a restaurant, I don't look on the wall to see if there is if there's something that says the health and safety folks have been there to make sure that this is not a place that I'm going to get sick. But that doesn't mean that someone's not in there. And in child care, it's just not the case.
So talking about comparable oversight of daycare homes, which are businesses.
Correct.
And later on, we're going to talk about zoning and homeowners associations and all of the reason that this is kind of a different kind of business.
Right.
And why people object to this kind of business. But when you go to the nail salon or you go to get your hair cut, right above that station is a license.
Right.
And it's required by law.
Correct.
So why do we not have the same requirement for child care providers?
We need to have the same requirement for child care providers. In the state of Virginia, there are 394,000 children between the ages of 6 and under the age of 6, and another 500 between the ages of 6 and 12. And parents work. The children need to be in child care, and that child care needs to be a safe and developmentally appropriate place for them to be. And studies show that children who are in a setting where there's social and emotional development that takes place, they are better off when they go to school. So in the long haul and in the long run, it's actually going to cost less money to ensure that these children are in the place where they need to be to set a strong foundation for their development.
So in talking, we've got early childhood education specialists sitting with us here. They keep talking about pre-K and the importance of pre-K. There are some places, Loudoun County doesn't even have full-day kindergarten. Right. So throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, there are widely varying levels of public education.
Correct.
But pre-K only solves part of the problem if you don't have children in daycare who are receiving appropriate developmental care from the age of 0.
Right. Correct. And another thing is, we talk about the hair salon and how there's a license posted. If you go and get a bad haircut, your hair grows back. If you go and get your hair colored, it fades. You can get it redone. Damage to a child that's developing, whether that child is a newborn or a toddler or 3 years old, 5 years old, that damage can't be replaced. It can't be, sometimes it's permanent damage. And these are things that then follow that child into school, and it is part of the foundation for their learning success in school and how successful they're going to be.
So clearly, daycare homes are the first choice of many parents for a lot of reasons. I had 3 children, they were all in a daycare home. Right. When my girls were born, they were 4 doors up the street from where I lived. And when my son was born, I had 3 children under the age of 5. they went to Kathy Doyen over in Burke, but I knew they were both licensed. I didn't know the details, and I never really asked questions about fire drills or fire marshals or home inspections. I figured because the county had licensed them, that somebody, to your point, was making sure my children were safe.
Right.
Correct.
So I can't imagine across the rest of the Commonwealth what parents are thinking, probably the same thing I'm thinking. Well, if you're operating a daycare business, surely someone's doing oversight of some kind.
Right. And from the perspective of talking about it and looking at it as a business, there's a real economic issue here, because if parents are not able to find quality childcare, they're not able to find a place where they feel like their child is safe, they're not able to be good employees. So it affects what sort of employees we have. So there's a real economic issue, and businesses, this is an issue that businesses do care about. That they need to know that the people that they hire, if they have children, are going to be dependable employees.
Correct.
They need to know that those employees are going to be able to come to work because their children are not sick all the time, because the person caring for them doesn't understand how critically important it is to wash your hands regularly. Just real basic things that you would think it would never even be an issue of discussion, and yet it's very different when you're in a home with just your own children, or if you're taking children from from a number of other people.
And that's what we are talking about here, is children who are unrelated and are non-relatives. So, there are parameters currently in the state for recognizing when you're running a daycare home, or whether you're just taking care on a temporary basis of a niece, or somebody who needs something temporary, or you're somebody's grandma.
Well,
Correct.
or even with that, we're not talking about, for example, moms who share with one another, so they take turns watching each other's child. We're talking about people who bring children into their home, who charge the parents money, and who take more than one additional family in care. Again, typically these are folks that are well-intentioned. They want to do a good job, but in a lot of instances, no one told them that, look, when you lay a baby down, when my children were young, my son is 27 now, my daughter is 24, the standard practice was to lay them on their bellies, because if they, then, so you didn't want them to aspirate, to breathe it back in, so you'd lay them on their bellies. Well, since that time, there's been a tremendous amount of research done. Now we know that the best way to make sure that babies don't die in their cribs from SIDS is by laying them down on their backs. And so, but a provider who, for example, has been caring for kids for a long time might not be aware of that.
And that's a good point. And I want to talk about, when we come back from our break, exactly some of the things that maybe every provider is not aware of, and that's why best practices, training, and new discoveries are so important when we do continuing professional development for professional daycare providers. And I'm really relying on the two of you to let us know.
Osama bin Laden calls getting nuclear weapons a religious duty.
Today, materials that can be used to make nuclear weapons are stored in more than 40 countries.
Sometimes protected by just a chain-link fence.
Yet not enough is being done to lock down these materials
Before terrorists steal them. Why did we learn all this?
My mother,
My son,
my sister-in-law.
were all murdered September 11th.
Help protect America.
Together we can. Please join us.
The stem cell issue is being debated throughout the country. Truth is, most everyone has an opinion, even if they don't know the facts.
Let's stop arguing and start really understanding the potential of stem cell research.
For us and for millions of Americans living with disabilities, get the facts.
Call 1-877-842-3442 for free information from the Stem Cell Research Foundation. That's 1-877-842-3442.
Following the tragic events of September 11th, there have been hundreds of violent attacks against innocent Americans.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for.
Remember, please stop the hate.
We're stronger when we are united.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for.
One nation under God.
Indivisible.
With liberty
and justice
for all.
In America, there's either room for everyone, or it's not America.
Don't pick the wrong fight.
Let's keep America land of the free.
Stop the hate.
Planning a home renovation? Put this at the top of your to-do list. Because after 10 years, none of you are protected against tetanus and another potentially fatal disease, diphtheria. A minor injury, such as a cut or a scrape, can put you at risk for a tetanus infection. And while safety gear offers some protection, An up-to-date vaccination called the TD booster is the best insurance against tetanus. So get the TD booster. If it's been 10, do it again.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Catherine Reed, your host for Inside Scoop Virginia. Our topic tonight is childcare regulation here in Virginia, specifically of childcare homes. Joining me is Mary Braxton of Prince William County and Candy Hilliard of Stafford County. And before we left on our break, we were talking about best practices and the things that daycare providers need to know as professional providers. It's not a case of, well, if you're a mom, and I have heard this actually came up in the book, that many legislators feel like, well, if you're a mom, you can take care of 12 kids at the same time, and because you're a mom, somehow magically this makes you a child care professional. And I think we're starting to understand, or we should understand, that's not the case, especially when you're caring for a lot of children of a similar age who are very young.
Right.
So I know that we're going to get some people who are like, well, we're going to drive providers underground. I have looked through all of the information you guys sent me, and it's like, well, if you have these requirements, then people will just go underground and you won't know if they're licensed. Now, Mary, I know you started out as a child care provider.
That's correct.
And your first 6 years were?
I was an underground child care provider, and during that time, I will be honest, I wanted to be regulated. I wanted to be licensed. It was very confusing and it was very overwhelming to do it. So I said, no, I'll just stick to the 5 and I'll watch 5 children plus my own children because I'm legally operating and I'll be fine. But I can tell you from experience, you do not stay at 5. You eventually add on a 6th, or a new person moves in, a new neighbor moves in. I was in an apartment complex.
Wow.
And new people would move in, and the leasing office, the maintenance man, he needed childcare, and I did not stick to my 5. And I know what happens. I experienced it, and I know 100%. And I didn't have the first aid training. I didn't have the CPR training. I didn't have the background check because none of those things are required. So we need to have something in place where these parents are dropping their children off where there's at least a background check on that person.
So is that one of the things that so if we wave a magic wand, Candy, what are we asking our General Assembly to consider for all 95 counties and 40 independent cities?
Well, we're certainly going to ask them to do nothing less than now what is required for people who are doing subsidy care. And typically, a lot of the folks that are doing subsidy care, so these are folks that are providing care for children who receive subsidy from social services, they have background checks. So they have a state police check and a child protective services check on themselves and everybody in their home. Because not only is the provider coming in contact with these children, anybody else who actually lives in the home comes in contact with these children. We're asking that CPR and first aid be part of what is required. We ask that they have at least 4 hours of skills training. We require that they have a TB test, and everybody in the house have a TB test. So these are real basic. They're to say that they're minimal is an understatement. But we should not allow children to be in places where they're not safe. And given the fact that 43 children have died in unregulated childcare since 2004. It's a wake-up call that we need to change this. Again, 25 years I've been in this business. I did child care for a number of years, and now I work for a child care resource and referral agency where we help parents find child care. I mean, one of the first things we've always said to them is, choose somebody who's licensed, because that they've met at least that threshold of basic health and safety for these kids. And that really is what's most important. And again, it's a basic thing that parents just assume that the health and safety piece is being addressed. And you mentioned about parents, like a mom being able to take care of 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 kids. Well, it's one thing when it's your own children. It's completely different when you're dealing with the business of it. When you're dealing with pick up and drop off, when you're dealing with a child who's having a hard time transitioning. One of the things that happens when children or when providers become regulated, they have access to resources. They have the ability, they learn about the food program, the fact that there is some money available to help them provide nutritious meals to the kids. They learn that there's all kinds of training out there, that they can learn how to deal with an angry child. They learn about basic brain development and what that looks like and why that's so important for young children. You know, they learn, you know, what do you do? How do we wash hands? You know, a mom who takes care of her own children, you know, hopefully everybody washes their hands after toileting, but, you know,
who's checking
not
on
everybody.
That? So tell me about Lexi's Law, because Lexi's Law is in Kansas, and it was something that they adopted after there was a child care death of a little girl named Lexi, and yet I think the point that I heard you make was that the number of deaths in Virginia is about twice what the deaths were in Kansas that prompted Lexi's Law. So in going forward, and let's be honest here, nothing is going to change unless we can convince legislators to pursue this legislatively through coming up with some basic standards that apply to everyone in the Commonwealth equally. But, you know, you've mentioned that we're 52nd on the list. You know, in comparing ourselves with other states, you know, why do you think, is it simply because no one has spearheaded this? Because it sounds to me like Child Care Aware Virginia has done a lot for us to not be any further along than we are.
There's been a real desire not to regulate. You know, there's sort of that feeling, well, you know, my mom did this and we're all fine.
But by the way, that was Pat Buchanan's exactly what he said to Bridget Schulte.
And unfortunately, they're still saying that. You know, in the Virginia General Assembly, if that's what's being said, it sort of doesn't reflect the fact that in most of Virginia, most of the parents are working. You know, they're working parents, both of them. There's many single family, you know, there's many single parent families. And so these children are in child care.
So this is an economic issue. You know, one of the things that I think Tim Kaine did so beautifully when he ran for the U.S. Senate in a debate that was at the Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce, and his opponent said, you know, people don't want to talk about all of these women's issues. And Tim Kaine said, they're not women's issues, they're economic issues.
They are. They are economic issues.
There are, and he proceeded to roll out why people should care. And so when I talk about child care issues, and there are people who are like, well, you know, I'm a grandmother now, or, you know, this is not a subject that interests me because I don't have children in daycare. I'm like, do you work with children in daycare? Do you manage people with children in daycare? Do you own a business that employs people with daycare? Then I think you need to care about daycare.
But you know, I think it's even bigger than that, and I think it's the piece that sort of gets lost in this. If we care about the economics of Virginia, if we want to make sure that Virginia is a place that that can compete on a worldwide scale, then these children who are in child care are going to be the children who are in school. It's much less expensive to make sure that children's development is moving along like it should by making sure they're in a quality program those first years than to wait till they get into school. Some of the latest statistics I've seen are for every dollar invested in early childhood education, it saves between $7 and $14. I mean, this is a huge economic issue. We want to make sure that our students have the ability, again, to compete on a worldwide stage. That means that they need to come to school ready to learn. And quality childcare enables them to come to school ready to learn. And we're not even talking about ABCs. We're talking about children who can share.
Socialize.
We're talking about
Stand
children
in
who
line,
can take turns.
sit still.
We're talking about children who know that they can ask for something and they don't have to hit in order to get it. Providers.
The other issue, the other piece of that is, even if the children are in child care, that there has to be available child care, or those teachers can't be there teaching. That principal wouldn't be there at that school.
Right.
There has to be something in place for those people to be able to work every day, and that involves childcare.
And along with that, you know, in order for military families to be able to access childcare, to be able to use, they have benefits that they can use to access childcare when there's no childcare available on post, or they don't live real close to wherever they're posted, wherever they work from. if there's not licensed childcare available in the community, they can't access those dollars.
Subsidies.
That's the subsidies to help them pay for it.
Is that a big problem in Prince William? Do you have a lot of people, military there?
Well, and I'm thinking more than that. Down in areas like Norfolk and down in that area,
even more so.
There's such a huge military.
Even more so,
state.
and we talked about that a little bit too. The fact that some people choose a daycare home over a daycare center for many, many, many reasons.
Exactly.
But one of them is the hours.
The hours,
Correct.
the flexibility. You know, not everybody works that 8 to 4 shift, weekends or evening, but there's also a difference in flexibility as far as a parent. If a parent tells a center, "This is all I can afford,"
right?
Does that center have the flexibility to work with that family and that parent?
No, not really.
If a family comes to a provider and says, "This is all I can afford," and it's $20 less than that provider's rate, many times that provider will work with that family. That family doesn't meet the qualifications for subsidized childcare, but that single mom may honestly need just that break to help get her a little more on her feet. And those children deserve the same
good quality
childcare and safe childcare as the two-parent family living in an area where they can afford the child care center option that they've chosen.
And how much of it is a problem, that border, that thin line between Fairfax County and Prince William County, where people might live in one place, work in the other, work in one place or whatever, and it's kind of like where they choose to place their child could have big consequences because they may not even be aware that there's a difference in a daycare home in Fairfax and a daycare home in Prince William.
In a lot of instances, that's the case again, and it shouldn't be like Russian roulette with where parents place their children. There's a place for government to step in, and this is one of those places. You know, we require that people who cut your hair get lots of training. We require that people that do pet grooming get lots of training. We need to require that folks that are caring for young children have training as well. And again, you're doing, quite often those folks want to do a good job, but if they don't know what that looks like, there needs to be an opportunity to find that information, and requiring that everyone meet basic health and safety standards is part of the way that we keep children safe.
I think that's true in the fact that we expect that from our public school system. You wouldn't send your child to school if they didn't do fire drills or didn't have a plan in place for if there was an allergic reaction or they choked on something. I mean, when we send our kids to school, we expect that every person in that school has been trained to deal with emergencies, and yet we are dropping off children in daycare homes, making a terrible assumption that all of that has been done.
And these are children that a lot of times can't talk. They can't tell you, well, I didn't, they didn't give me any food, or I sat in my chair all day, or nobody gave me any belly time.
Well, I think when we get back, we're going to talk about some specifics about what it's going to take to get providers behind this concept that it benefits them as a business and as professionals to get on board and talk about the regulations and how we expect some pushback to come from the General Assembly when we get back.
This is firstgov.gov, where we're obsessed with getting you government information.
Brand new student loan applications on the site, baby. This calls for a celebration. Where's your uncle?
So in the end, it was either take the astronaut gig or come work here. What can I say? Duty called.
Dude, that's my cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that's Sam's cop.
Oh, sorry?
Yeah. No. Sam's? No.
Just log on or email us and get what you need.
C, change of address form. That's how it's done. D, driver's license renewal.
E, emailing Social Security information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice, we'll allow it. All right, Ed. What are those?
Government surplus cars for auction.
You posted those online last time.
No, you did.
I'm posting them online this time!
For all your government information, firstgov.gov.
Oh, what have we got here? Sometimes you feel tired. You can't seem to lose those extra pounds off your midsection. And your joints hurt when you take the stairs? Well, you're getting older. But I'm happy to say that there's some simple things we can do to keep you happy and healthy for years to come. We can also lower your risk for some serious diseases the older population is often subject to. Proper nutrition is more important than ever. Your body has changed, you know. Not as many treats. A basic exercise plan, lots of walks and fresh air, and most importantly, come and see me for twice yearly checkups to help ensure the best possible quality of life. Now, how does that sound? Good boy.
Improve the quality of life for your elderly pet. Schedule twice yearly checkups that include preventive care and regular lab work. A message from the veterinary members of the American Animal Hospital Association.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Catherine Reed. The subject tonight is regulation of child care homes here in Virginia. My guests are Mary Braxton of Prince William County and Candy Hilliard of Stafford County. And I want to turn our attention to some specifics here about how daycare providers feel about this, how we reach providers and organize them, because it seems to me, as a grassroots organizer and an activist, that nothing really happens unless you can organize people in some way. And I know you are the outreach coordinator for Childcare Aware Virginia, in Northern Virginia, right. Of Northern Virginia. So is that part of what you do?
That is a part of it. I actually work for Childcare. We're a part of Childcare Aware Virginia, and our resource and referral agency does a lot of outreach to parents. Any parent that calls looking for childcare, we also send them information about things they want to ask, questions they want to look at, what licensing looks like, what the different types of regulations look like. As the outreach person, I'm working with the Department of Social Services, specifically those programs that are working with the subsidy vendors. So they're the folks that are providing child care for children who receive subsidies. And a big part of what we're doing is making sure that the skills training for those subsidy vendors is available. So I'm willing to go out into these programs and provide skills training. It's also about talking to the folks that are working with the subsidy vendors and making sure that they're aware that there is technical assistance available. If they go into a child care program and they see a provider who's struggling with the way her environment is set up, we're willing to come in and help that provider figure out maybe a better way to set up the space for children. We're willing to help to provide technical assistance if they have a child that's really struggling with transition. Because a lot of times kids really don't like to go from one thing to the next. They like to be able to operate on their own time frame. So those are things that are available. We also like to talk with making sure that people are aware of how they can become regulated if they're interested in that. Of all the aspects of all the business aspects, we require that businesses pay taxes. Child care is no different, and yet quite often folks that are not kind of connected in, they don't really know that maybe that's a requirement that they have, that they are supposed to pay taxes. And we have that sort of information. We have a lot of knowledge that we can share if they're interested. Also, again, the USDA food program is another piece of that, and it helps folks understand how critical nutrition is to children's development, and it enables them to get a small subsidy to be able to feed the children in a nutritious way.
And that sounds like all benefits. So, right. So Mary, what is the onerous thing to become licensed? I mean, what do you have to do to become licensed?
First aid, CPR training. You pay a $14 licensing fee. You attend 2 orientations, which are free. Background checks, TB test on yourself as well as anyone over 18 in the home. Of course, there are other things that eventually, as you become established, become in place. But as far as is it costly in the beginning, it isn't. And there's support out there to do it. Again, I'm the president of the state association, the Virginia Alliance of Family Child Care Associations, and we are made up of over 500 licensed providers across the state of Virginia. We have over 20 local family child care associations. Those associations meet typically once a month. They offer training, they offer support. It's a source of networking. Because there are, of course, training requirements. You need to meet 16 hours of training per year. But there's a whole resource network out there that's available for the providers to do this. And that there are other obstacles that can become very costly, and unfortunately, that doesn't have necessarily a lot to do with licensing per se, other than it's a requirement to go to the zoning office and have the zoning.
So let's talk about zoning, because we've been talking about child care homes. My children were in a single family home, and then they were in a townhome with Kathy. When Kathy Doyen kept them, they were in a townhome. And so we have a lot of homeowners associations in Virginia. And I know that I have read recently a news story about somebody whose daycare home was shut down. Mm-hmm. And so, there might be a lot of people reluctant to be licensed, because being under the radar means that you don't attract the notice of the zoning people.
Correct.
So how do we get around that? I know that California and Maryland have both addressed homeowners association and sort of the limit of what homeowners associations can or cannot do related to daycare homes.
Correct. Basically, in several areas of Virginia, I'm not going to say every area and every community, but it is happening more and more often and frequently. The homeowners associations are refusing to allow the licensed provider to operate, or if there's a licensed provider operating, they want them closed down, giving them very little notice. 4 months notice.
Didn't you have a situation where somebody had been a daycare provider in the same home for 15 years?
Yes, she was a licensed childcare provider in the same home, the same community for 15 years. She actually at one point watched the homeowner association president, his granddaughter, for 4 years.
Wow.
And was still closed down by her homeowners association. She asked if she could work to amend the bylaws in order to operate and remain open, and they absolutely refused. They gave her no leeway whatsoever, and she had to close within about 5 months.
And daycare, because I've sat through the Fairfax City Council meetings where daycare providers come before the City Council because, they have to re-up their special use permit in the city. And I've sat through the testimony, and they send out people to look it over and all of that. And so many communities want and desperately need childcare in a neighborhood for the people who live in the neighborhood.
Right. One of the things that often happens when there's a discussion about zoning and about the impact of family daycare in a neighborhood, there are a number of things that I think are out there that is thought to be that a lot of times the homeowners associations feel like this is why we don't want it. Sometimes they'll say, well, it's going to impact the value of our homes. And yet the reality is somebody who's operating this business, since it is a business, they're more likely to make sure that things are kept neat, things are kept clean, because you get people to come if it looks like a nice place to be.
Yeah, nice house, nice neighborhood.
Other folks sometimes will talk about, well, the parking, there's a huge parking issue. Well, the reality is parents typically come in a staggered fashion so that everybody doesn't come at one time. They come, they drop off, and they leave. And typically the number of trips would be less than, for example, if you had a teenage child living there when kids first start learning to drive. So that shouldn't be something that prevents them. One of the other things is that we hear sometimes is that, kids make a lot of noise. And I guess the question ends up being, is there any more natural sound in a neighborhood than children playing? And I think the thing that gets lost in this is that if a child is in child care, then the licensing requirement is that they be in sight and sound at all times. So those are children that are going to be supervised. They're not going to be children running around crazy. They're not going to be all over the neighborhood. So those are not really legitimate arguments, but those are ones that are pretty typically brought up when the licensing discussion comes up or when the HOAs are looking for ways to shut it down. The ruling is that it's residential use of property when you're doing family child care in a home. And several years ago, many years ago now, we got preemptive zoning legislation passed, which said that the legislation said that if it was 5 or fewer children, they could not be prohibited from doing child care in a home. But apparently that doesn't actually address the HOA issues. Wow. It just strictly addresses the zoning issues.
So that's a loophole.
Well, it's a loophole, and it's such a big issue. How do you as a family child care provider figure that out? I mean, and that's sort of the point. This needs to be simplified. It needs to be streamlined. We need to make sure that if providers are following the state requirements, then they should be allowed to do child care.
Well, and the other issue, the wording, as far as the homeowners association, the wording that's in the bylaws that's creating the problem states no business in exchange, no goods or services in exchange for money.
Right.
Some homeowners associations are perfectly fine. They support the licensed provider operating. There's actually an association, a homeowners association in Western Prince William County, and they allow the Child Care Association to have monthly meetings once a month in their boardroom.
That's great.
And they support them doing the meetings and doing the trainings.
Right.
And then you have another provider and the Homeowners Association in Western or Eastern Prince William County that was shut down after 15 years of operating in the same home,
right,
in the same community, and watching that president's granddaughter for 4 years,
right,
and was shut down quickly with
right,
no regard to anything. And then you have another family provider in Prince William County who lives right down the street from that one, who that homeowners association is allowing her to go through the process of trying to amend the bylaws.
Right.
But what that means is she has to go and knock on 300 doors,
right,
and get signatures and go through the process. But at least they're allowing
right,
that.
And the piece of this that makes it really basically unfair is that zoning is individual to every single locality in Virginia.
True.
So those 95 counties and 40 individual independent cities all have different zoning requirements. And then when you stack on top of that the whole HOA and like condo management discussion, it makes it almost an impossible situation for either parents to figure out or for providers to figure out. This is a very appropriate place for the Virginia General Assembly to step in and say, look, we want to create fairness across the board. We want to create a consistent way of addressing these issues. The General Assembly has the ability to do that by addressing these issues directly.
And that's, and I don't want to pit homeowners who have no children against homeowners with children who need daycare close to their home. And so there should be an effective way for us to have a discussion about what benefits a community, and not pitting the get off my lawn generation with people who are desperate to find reliable, quality, regulated daycare close to where they live.
Right. And that's one of the things when we talk about this whole issue of like too many traffic trips or whatever in neighborhoods. In a lot of instances, these are children who live in that neighborhood, and in reality, it really does benefit a neighborhood to have somebody at home during the day. Most neighborhoods you go in and there's like nobody in the neighborhood.
Exactly. And my kids, we strolled them up in the stroller and we strolled them back in the afternoon.
Absolutely.
So to your point, the people in the neighborhood were the people supporting the home-based daycare, and we all knew each other, and we were all neighbors, and I think that creates a wonderful sense of community as well. Right. So when we get back, I think what we want to talk about next is how we go forward and who is working on our issue. So when we get back.
This year, 28,000 Americans will be diagnosed with oral cancer. Every year, 7,000 Americans die of oral cancer.
I'm Eva Cohen, and I'm an oral cancer survivor. I didn't fit the profile. I didn't smoke or drink. I had no family history of cancer, no family history of cancer. I was 31 years old. 31 years old. I went to see my dentist about a sore in my mouth that wouldn't heal. It was oral cancer. I had to have a radical neck dissection and a portion of my tongue reconstructed. I didn't know if I was going to live or die.
I'm Surgeon General Richard Carmona. The survival rate for oral cancer is only 50%. Oral cancer can happen to anyone. If If you have a sore or lesion in your mouth that doesn't heal within 2 weeks, see your dentist. Early detection is the key.
Early detection saves lives. I know.
1 in 8 Americans goes hungry. One idea helped change that. A community started a garden that blossomed into farmers markets. 1 in 6 children lives in poverty. One group of women found an answer by opening a daycare center that their neighbors could afford. Today, 36 million Americans live in poverty. But one by one, people are helping themselves and each other to change the picture of poverty to one of hope. For easy ways you can help, visit povertyusa.org.
2 words for you. Pop quiz. Ready? Name any funny movie. A drama. Name a mystery. And one more thing. Name the movie your kids saw today in science class.
Know what really matters. Know about your kid's school. And know about your kid. Find out 100 ways to know more, do more.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Catherine Reed. I'm talking with Mary Braxton and Candy Hilliard, and the discussion tonight is about regulating child care homes in Virginia. So when we last left you, we were talking a little bit about homeowners associations, but we now are going to pivot a bit to child care providers who operate in condos and apartments. You said that you provided daycare in your apartment complex.
I was in an apartment complex.
So how are those challenges a little bit different?
I had the support of the community to do the child care, but there are issues with the licensing, the leasing office not allowing that to take place and not allowing the provider to be licensed and do child care, which then would feed into the fact that the provider would still possibly be watching children, but be unregulated. So that again helps to feed into that unregulated.
And can I just, talking about apartments more so than condos, is this disproportionately affecting low-income families who live in apartments?
No, it's affecting anybody living in apartments. And I've talked to several, specifically in Fairfax County. Fairfax County is having an issue with the apartment leasing office allowing the provider to get approval for zoning to operate and be a licensed provider in that apartment complex. And that's also occurring in condos.
So there's obviously a smaller amount of space in an apartment or a condo.
Correct.
And I know that there's a point system, which I would love for you to explain how that works as far as figuring out not just the number of children, but it's relative to age.
Right. If you're licensed in the state of Virginia and you're a licensed provider, then you can have up to so many children or so many points per provider, and each age group is broken down and allotted and given points. So for example, an infant is worth 4 points.
Up to 16 months.
Up to 16 months. Mm-hmm. And at 16 months up to age 2, it's 3 points. From 2 to age 5, it's 2 points. And then 5 to 9, the child is worth 1 point. So there's a system, a checks and balances system already in place by the State Department of Social Services, where you can have so many children, and I'm just going to use the number of 12.
Okay, 12
and
children.
let's just say 12 children, or you need to be in compliance with that 12 children top capacity, or the points, and have so many points. You can only have up to 16 points by yourself. Once you reach as a provider that 17 point, you need to have another adult. It's 16 points per adult based on the ages of the children.
So the way that it works is, for example, you're not allowed to have a family child care home that is licensed in the state is not allowed to ever have more than 12 children in care. And although But I guess the main thing to know is that that is based on a point system. So you could have up to 12, but maybe you'd have to have 3 adults if all of those were infants. But typically in a family child care home, you have a mix. You might have 1 infant, you might have 3 preschoolers, and you might have, say, 4 school-age children. And based on the points, that would determine how many adults had to be there. And when you have folks that are living in townhomes, in condos and apartments, and they say, well, no, you can't do it in those places. Well, it still does occur in those places because these are places where children live. So the importance of making sure that wherever children are living, that people can legally do family child care, you make sure that those providers have the resources they need, and you make sure that those children are in a safe place. So that needs to become the bottom line.
So the argument that you know, creating more regulation is going to drive people underground is really not an argument, because there are already people working as unlicensed.
Correct.
And the thing to remember in that is that they're not even underground. We haven't decided that it was important enough to make sure that there was someone. You want to make sure someone's at least looking to see that these children are safe. And there's an assumption that parents make that that if this person is open to do child care, then there must be somebody looking around or seeing what's going on.
The other piece of that is we can't honestly say for the majority of the state that they're operating underground without a license.
Correct.
If in the majority of the state we allow them to watch up to 5 children.
Right. That's true.
And there's
So
nobody going in to make sure that they have 5 children. They could have 7, they could have 10. Nobody knows because there's nobody going in.
But again, and you don't know who else is living in that house. You know, if you have somebody who has, you know, a record, who's a pedophile, you don't want that child. You want to make sure that child's in a place that's not an issue. And parents need to know that they need to ask that question, because right now, throughout most of the state, nobody knows.
And I think there was a case that was that she pointed out in the book, where you can be a convicted felon, you could have a felony in another state, and do daycare
Correct.
here in Virginia, and no one is the wiser.
Correct, because we don't require fingerprinting. And that is one of the bills that was raised last year that was sent to study, which is often they say, you know, bills that are sent to study are sent, it's a place they're sent to die. But I don't think in this instance that's true. Hopefully Virginia will decide that every person who's working with young children should have to be fingerprinted. And what they were doing was figuring out what would be required to make that happen through regulation. You know, what's it going to cost? Where do they go to get it done? That's something that the federal government that they're pushing at the federal level as well. So I think it's going to happen. You know,
so who are our heroes in the Virginia General Assembly that we can kind of look to? I know that you guys have been working on this issue a lot longer than I have. You know, I'm kind of late to this party. To figure out who it is we're looking to kind of provide leadership on this issue in our General Assembly.
Well, Delegate Fillercorn, Delegate Anderson, Delegate Torian,
Delegate Weber.
Delegate Weber, yeah. Senator Favola. I know that there are a number of other folks that are looking at it as well, but I know that those are folks that have specifically looked at maybe introducing legislation in the upcoming session.
And how do we build more public awareness about the fact that this is an economic issue? This is an issue we all need to care about as people who have daycare homes possibly where we live that may or may not be licensed. The fact that we all work with other people in what we do for a living who need daycare, or we own small businesses, or we, you know, are in organizations that require that people who have children have reliable, affordable, well-regulated daycare. Although regulation is such a negative word, and I think people feel like it's onerous or burdensome, when in fact it's really oversight.
Well, really what we're looking for is to make sure that any place that children are spending all of their day without their parents, that they're in a safe and healthy environment. And that's what every parent wants. And I don't think there's anybody in the community that would say they thought that was a bad idea. So I think it really is a matter of helping folks understand this is what it looks like when there's childcare. The provider that was shut down in Prince William, you drive by her house, you would never know that she did childcare. No, that she did childcare at all. There's no signs outside. Again, it just looks like a house, because part of the requirement in all of this is you can't change the outside physical structure of the house to do childcare. It has to be inside of a home.
There's a couple pieces. Licensed family child care is residential use of the property.
Correct.
It can only take place in a residence where the provider lives.
Correct.
It can't take place next to 7-Eleven. It can't take place in a strip center.
Right.
If it took place in one of those places, it would not be family day home.
It
would be
center.
licensed center.
Right.
So that's number one. Number two is the capacity is much smaller, usually a mixed age group, which is much better for a child. Not every child does well in a center.
Right.
And every child deserves quality child care, and every parent deserves to make the choice based on the needs of what they need. But when you have a mixed age group, that many times becomes a second family to that child, and there's a lot of bonding that takes place between that child and that provider, as well as that parent and that provider, because you see the same provider when you drop the child off, the same providers with that child in the middle of the day, and the same providers with that child in the evening when you pick that child up.
Right.
And you don't typically have that at a daycare center. And that's not to say that there's a problem with a center. It's simply saying not every child and not every parent will select a center because it's not going to meet the needs of what they need.
Even more than that, there are places in the state that they almost don't have any centers. Orange, Virginia right now has had someone, one of the family daycare providers, licensed family daycare providers, was working with the town of Orange to establish a daycare center. They'd had one daycare center in the town. It closed down. So where do parents take those children if there are no daycare centers in that community? They go to family child care homes. So making sure that those homes are safe places for children, that the people who are working with these children are intentional, and part of that intentionality means that they're going to go through this process of finding out what it takes to make sure all the health and safety needs of that child are addressed, and licensing addresses all of those.
Well, and on top of that, you're mentioning that in some areas there's only one center, or there may be any centers or two centers. But on top of that, in that area where there may only be one center, there may also be only one licensed family child care provider.
Right.
So therefore, all other child care in that area and community is unregulated, which means no background check done whatsoever on any adult in that home, and children are being brought in.
Right.
And are the parents even aware of that? And is that where we should be having these children?
Right.
And I think as we start, because the session starts January 14th, it's 45 days long, which is a very short legislative period in Virginia, among the many other things that make us so unique here in Virginia. That's one of them, a part-time legislature that tries to look at thousands of bills in 45 days.
Right.
But what would you, as we close out our show, what would you suggest that people do who want to make their voice heard, get more involved, find out more information, or basically sort of jump on this bandwagon to help us push forward this as an urgent need here in the Commonwealth of Virginia?
Well, one of the places where there's tons and tons of information about what's actually going on with regard to child care in Virginia is Childcare Aware of Virginia. You can go to that website. It's just www.childcareawareofvirginia.org, I believe. But there's, again, so many materials about what's actually going on in Virginia. They can get in contact with their legislators. Voices down in Richmond are really great about pulling together all of the information around what legislation is being proposed. They need to let their local legislators know, look, we think this is an important issue, and we support it being addressed.
Will Childcare Aware Virginia do a lobby day?
Absolutely. And I'm sorry that I don't know what it is.
That's okay, but you know, if they post it on the website, everybody go to the website, find out when the lobby day is going to be.
There is, BASI does a Capital Steps Day, Martin Luther King.
Okay, Martin Luther King.
BASI is the Virginia Association
for the Education
of Young Children. Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Well, you guys have been absolutely wonderful. I cannot thank you enough, both of you, for coming up here and talking to us. I think a lot of people, including myself, are truly uninformed, not because we don't care about the issue or that we don't have kids, but just the fact that there are so many moving parts. I appreciate your expertise. I appreciate your stories and your input, and I really, really want to, and I hope our guests will go to the website and check out all